This week, I'll show you how sometimes your composition can trick your light meter. The light meter in your camera is a sophisticated bit of kit. It has a few different settings on it, but most people will keep it in multimeter mode. In this setting, it looks at the whole image and works out the exposure from that. Sometimes your camera can be tricked into giving you a bad exposure. When there are a lot of dark parts to the image, the light meter will brighten it up. When there are a lot of bright parts to the image, the light meter will darken the exposure down. This is all well and good, but when the subject is the darker part of the image surrounded by bright parts, the subject tends to get underexposed. On the other hand, when the subject is surrounded by lots of dark parts, it'll tend to be overexposed. There are a few ways to counteract this depending on what mode you're shooting in. Generally, if you're shooting in auto mode, everything is automatic, so you won't have the option to tweak and tune the image as you shoot it. It may give you a backlit option and the flash might pop up. And this is good for when the subject is close to you or when you're shooting people, but if you're shooting big landscapes, the flash really isn't going to help. So this is another reason why you want to come out of automatic, so you get the control of what your camera shoots and how it shoots it. If you're still shooting in auto mode but want to come out of it to get more control of your camera, click on the link in the top corner. This will take you to my video showing you step by step how to come out of auto mode. If you shoot in P, A or S mode, there are several ways to change your exposure. You can use your exposure compensation to shift the exposure either up or down. This is a way of you correcting the camera in these semi-automatic modes. You can set your exposure meter to spot metering and make sure this spot is on the subject when you half press your shutter button. This will then give you the correct exposure for the subject. When using the spot meter, you may have to use the exposure compensation as well to tweak it in and get the exposure that you want. You can bracket your shots, so the camera will take 3 shots. One underexposed, one where the camera thinks it should be exposed, and one overexposed. It also takes more work in post-processing with either HDR or luminosity masks, but with the right amount of blending, you can produce some stunning images. You can use graduated filters if you have a fairly straight horizon to bring down the intensity of the brightest parts of the image. To start with, you want to look for a well-balanced image, so you know the camera will cope with it well. Then as you get more used to the camera and want to push your skills further, the ways I've just mentioned will give you the ability to cope with images with a higher dynamic range. The dynamic range basically means the difference between the brightest and the darkest parts. If the image is quite even, the dynamic range is quite low. If there are really bright parts in the image and then deep shadows, you'll have a high dynamic range. And that's about it. If you're shooting in one of the semi-automatic modes, remember to use exposure compensation or spot metering to help you get a good exposure on the subject. If you're shooting in manual or the dynamic range is huge, start thinking about using bracketing with luminosity masks or HDR. As always, if you like what you see, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down. And for weekly tutorials, hints and tips in photography, subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.